as you're using the video over page D76, it's really important to remember that you need to make sure you are trying the problem yourself first, and then you're using the video to check your answer. So please make sure before you look at letter A, try it yourself. I'm going to start off each problem by telling you what the answer should have been first. Then, if you don't get the answer right, watch that part of the video, make corrections to your paper. If you got it right, you can just fast forward and move on. So this first one for letter A at the top of page D76, if you got the correct answer, you should have gotten 5.3 for your answer. Now, if you didn't get that, please follow along with me and we'll figure out what we did wrong. Remember the way Pythagorean theorem works is that you've got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. C squared is the longest side, otherwise known as your hypotenuse, and then a squared and b squared are the legs of your triangle. So that means in our picture right here, if we square this guy and square this side. So I'm just going to call this side A. I'm going to call this side B. I just as easily could have called this side B and this side A. It doesn't matter as long as they're the two shorter sides. So if I square this side is 6. So if I square 6, and I know that 6 squared is 36, because 6 times 6 is 36. Remember that squaring something means to multiply it by itself. So a squared, in this case 6 squared, is 36. Now b squared, we don't know what b squared is yet, because that is our missing side. Since we don't know what b is, we can't know what b squared is. But if we take these two numbers and we square them, and then we add them together, it'll give us the square of the longest side, the hypotenuse. And of course, c squared, in this case, is 8 times 8, which is 64. So right now, a squared is 36. I don't know what b squared is, but they both add together to get 64, because that's c squared. Now, what a lot of you guys have been doing when you're missing a leg is you've been adding these two numbers together and then taking the square root. Remember, that's not what you do when you're missing a leg, because you've got to figure out, okay, a squared plus this mystery b squared is going to give me c squared. Well, to figure out what b squared is, you've got to subtract. That's 64 minus 36. 64 minus 36 is 28. So that means that b squared is 28. And I can go back and I can check. So let's see, a squared was 36 plus b squared, I think, is 28. Does that equal c squared? Yes, it does. It does equal 64. So I know I found the right number for b squared. Now, I still haven't finished yet, though, because the problem is just asking for the missing side. Right now, this 28 that I've found is the whole square. It's if I squared b. I want to know what just plain b is. So if b squared is 28, I need to unsquare it. We've talked before about to unsquare something. Use the square root button on your calculator. So I'm going to put in the square root of 28. Square root of 28 left me with, it was like 5 point, let's see, square root of 28 gave me 5.2915, a whole bunch of stuff. Well, 5.291, the problem says to round to the nearest tenth. So that means I'm going to round it to 5.3. So that is where my answer came from. Letter B, if you got 17.8, you got it correct, and you can move on. Fast forward. If you didn't get it right, please follow along. So again, we've got a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So this time, as opposed to the last one, my two legs are given to me. Please excuse the lousy squares there that I just drew. So if we square this one and then square this one and add them together, it'll give us the square of this side, whatever c happens to be. Remember, c is always your longest side, so that's why I made this one c. So I'm going to square 11. 11 times 11, of course, is 121. So this is, I'm going to call this a. So a squared is 121. I'm going to call this one, again, it doesn't matter which one you call a squared and which one you call b squared. A and b, as long as you assign it to each leg, it doesn't matter. So 14 times 14 is 196. So now as opposed to the last example where I had to subtract because I had a missing leg. Now I'm just going to add them together because that's what you do. You add a squared plus b squared, and that gives you your c squared. So 196 plus 121 is going to give me 317. So that's what the whole c squared gives me, not just what c is. So now I've got to unsquare the 317 by using the square root function. That gives me 17.804 and a whole bunch of other jazz after that, which is pretty darn close to 17.8 if we're rounding to the nearest tenth. C, if you got 9.7, you're correct. If you got that, you can just move on. I'm going to go ahead and work it. This time, just like the first example, now we're missing a leg, and our hypotenuse was given to us. So I'm going to call this one A for no particular reason, just because A squared is 49, B squared is what we're missing right now, and then C squared equals 144. So because A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So A squared is 49. I don't know what B squared is yet, because I can't know what B squared is if I don't know what this side is. And C squared is 144. Just like the first example, now I'm going to have to subtract to figure out what B squared is, because 49 plus something gives me 144. So in order to figure out what that missing number is, I'm just going to subtract 49 from both sides. So B squared is equal to 95. Of course, that gives me the area of that whole square. I want to figure out just what one side of that square is. So I'm going to unsquare it by taking the square root of 95. Move that out of the way. That gives me about 9.746. Because that 4 is smaller, that means that 7 is going to stay rounded down to a 9.7. Letter D, if you got the correct answer, you should have gotten 12. I'm going to go ahead and work it for you. So again, like the last one, we're missing a leg again, and the hypotenuse was given to us. So I'm going to call this one A and this one B. So A squared in this case, we don't know what it is yet because this side wasn't given to us. B squared is 81. And C squared, 15 times 15, is going to be 225. So that means whatever my mystery A squared is, plus 81, that's going to give me 225. I'm going to have to subtract. That gives me 144 for A squared. Maybe we don't even need to use a calculator this time, because to unsquare it, remember, we have to take the square root of 144, which means we've got to figure out what number times itself would give me 144 for this area right here. Well, 12 times 12 gives me 144. So that means that this side is 12 units long, because the square root of 144 is 12. Letter E, you should have gotten 8.3. If you didn't, keep watching. Again, I am missing a leg. So I'm going to call this one A. I'm going to call this one B. And of course, because it's the hypotenuse, that is always C. Okay, so A squared, I don't know what A squared is yet, because I don't know what this side is so that I can square it. I know that B squared, however, is 10 times 10, which is 100. And I know that C squared is 13 times 13, which is 169. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A squared is still a mystery. B squared is 100. Those two added together gives 169. So in order to figure out what A squared is, I'm going to take away 100. So A squared is equal to 69. That still doesn't tell me what just this side is. It tells me the value of the area of the whole square. So I've got to unsquare it. If I do that by taking the square root, I get about 8.3. It was like 8.306, which will just round to 8.3. Letter F, you should have gotten 25.5 for your answer. If you didn't, please watch the video. So this time, they give you the legs, and the hypotenuse is what's missing. So I'm going to call this A, I'm going to call this B, this is going to be C. Okay, so A squared is going to be 18 times 18, 324, which is also what B squared is going to be. Seven 324 for A squared and B squared. So that's going to give me 648. So I'm going to do the square root of 648, which gives me pretty close to 25. Oops, to 25.5. It's like 25.45, and this 5 is going to round up that 4, so it's 25.5. So you can just spot a TV set. The screen has a diagonal of 40 inches. If the screen is 32 inches wide, how high is it? So this is what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out if the screen is 32 inches wide and the diagonal is 40, how high is it? So notice it kind of makes like an imaginary right triangle right there, which means we can use Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to make my little imaginary squares. Put in my A squared plus B squared equals C squared. All right, so this time the hypotenuse is 40. So 40 squared would be 40 times 40, which is 1600. So I'm going to put that in for C squared. A squared, I don't know what A squared is yet, so I'm just going to put in X squared for right now. B squared, though, I'm calling that 32-inch side B. So that means I need to do 32 times 32. That gives me 1,024. Oh, I forgot to tell you that the answer for this was 24. So if you got 24 for your answer, you can move on. Okay, so I did x squared plus 1,024. Again, because I have a missing leg, I'm going to have to subtract instead of adding them together. You only add when you're given A plus B. But whenever you're not given both A and B, you're going to have to subtract. So I'm going to do 1,600 minus 1,024, which is 576. So that's x squared. So in order to unsquare it, I've got to get the square root of 576. That means that this side right here is the square root of 576, which is 24. Number 3, you should have gotten 24 also for this answer. So let's draw a little picture so we can make sense of this problem. It says a 25-foot ladder is leaned against a wall. So here's your wall. Here's your ladder leaned against the wall. It tells you that the ladder is 25 feet long. If the base of the ladder, okay, so the base is the bottom of the ladder, is 7 feet from the wall. So that means the distance from the end of the ladder to the wall is 7 feet. How high up the wall will the ladder reach? So that's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out of our little imaginary right triangle that's been created here, from the ladder leaning up against the wall, trying to figure out how high that ladder is going to reach. So I'm going to make my imaginary right triangles here. Again, it's just a right triangle problem. We're missing a leg. So I'm going to call this one A. So A squared is going to be 49. I don't know what B squared is yet, so I'm going to leave that one alone for a minute. But then C squared is going to be 25 times 25, which is 625. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So A squared is 49 plus B squared equals 625. So I'm going to subtract off 49. So it's going to leave me with b squared is equal to whatever 625 minus 49 is, which is 576. So now I've got to unsquare it. The square root of 576, as we learned in the last problem, is 24. So that means that our wall, this side right here, is 24 feet high. So as Greg swam across an 80-meter river, the current carried him 30 miles downstream. How far did he swim? So basically, as he's swimming in this direction, he's kind of getting pulled by the current down this way a little bit. So this is the distance that he traveled. Notice it's made a little imaginary right triangle. So in your imaginary right triangle, the distance that he swam is the longest side. So these are going to be my legs. This is going to be my hypotenuse. So here, I'm going to call this A. So A squared, 80 times 80 is 6,400. Here, B squared, 30 times 30 is 900. Oh, sorry, I forgot again to tell you the answer should have been 65.4. So if you got that right, you can just keep on moving on to the next one. Okay, so this is C right here is our missing amount. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This time the two shorter sides were given to us. So 6,400 plus 99 equals C squared. So 6,400 plus 900 is going to give us 7,300. So that's the area of this whole C squared. But again, like we've done a bunch, we're going to have to unsquare it. Square root of 7,300 is about 85.44, which simplifies to 85.4 since we're rounding to the nearest tenth. Number 5. This one could be a little bit complicated if you don't know anything about ships. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you the answer, and that you should have gotten 16.6. But you may want to go ahead and watch anyway, just so you know what exactly this problem is talking about. Okay, so if this is your ship, and yes, I know that's a really stupid drawing of a ship. Okay, the mast is the part that stands up on the boat, that holds part of the sail. Okay, so the mast is 20 feet tall, and a rope is stretched 26 feet from the top of the mast to a cleat on the deck. So it means there's a rope going from the top to the deck that is 26 feet tall. So how far is the cleat from the base? So we're just trying to figure out in this little imaginary right triangle right here. How long is that? So really, it's a right triangle problem where you're given one leg and the hypotenuse. So A squared, I'm going to call this one A, is 400 because that's 20 times 20. B squared, we don't know yet because we don't know how long this side is. C squared is going to be 26 times 26, which is 676. So we've got our A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So A squared is 400 plus B squared is our missing amount equals C squared. That's 676. I've got to subtract, so B squared is going to be 276 after I subtract that 400 from it. So I'm going to have to find the square root of 276. So it's going to be about 16.6. Number 6, each side of an equilateral triangle measures 12 centimeters. Find the height. So look, if we cut this triangle in half, we've really got, again, an imaginary right triangle. So we've got a problem where it gives us the hypotenuse and one leg. We've got to figure out the other leg. Actually, I want to make this a different color so it stands out. So I am going to just call this a squared. So a squared is going to be 36. B squared, we don't know yet because it's this height right here. Height, h times h, we don't know what that is yet, so b squared is still a mystery. But this hypotenuse right here is c squared, which is going to be 144. So we're doing a squared plus b squared to get c squared. This is my 144. A squared is 36. I don't know what b squared is, so I'm going to have to subtract. I'm going to have to do 144 minus 36. So b squared is 108. Unsquare it. Gives me about 10.392, which is going to round to 10.4 if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth. Last but not least, two jets leave the airport, so we're going to call this the airport at the same time. One traveled east at 300 miles per hour. The other one traveled south at 400 miles per hour. How far apart were the jets at the end of the hour? So we're basically looking for this distance right here, because if they both started out here, one went east, which is that way, one went south, which is that way. By the end of that hour, how far were they apart? You should have gotten 500 for your answer. If you didn't get it, let's see why. So we've basically just got two legs of a right triangle. So 400 squared is going to be 160,000. Because you do the 4 times 4 to get 16, and then you've got 4 zeros. 300 times 300 is 90,000. So if we do 160,000 plus 90,000, that gives us c squared, which is 250,000. Well, that tells us the area of the square. Doesn't tell us how long just this one side is. So we got to square root it. So the square root of 250,000 is 500. So they're 500 miles away. So remember, when you're doing these, the biggest mistakes I've seen people making so far is that if you're given two sides, if you're given the two legs, you need to add them together. But if you're given a leg and the hypotenuse, you're going to have to subtract. So make sure that you keep that in mind.